Hello and welcome to class 22, where we will be discussing believing to belong and the novice expert problem. In some ways, these topics are lead-ins to the themes of the final section, which is about in-group epistemic distortion and the tactics of bad faith actors. I will be discussing what that means at the end of this video. For now, I want to talk about these issues as they relate to the topic of this section, which is reasoning with sources. We began this section by looking at arguments from authority, that is, situations where you are asked to believe something on someone's say-so. In these situations, where the people you are relying on are experts in a technical field, the novice expert problem arises. Basically, the problem is just that you, a novice, can't evaluate the expertise of the expert without becoming an expert yourself. The methods for evaluating arguments from authority we talked about in class 18 are the beginnings of a way around this problem. But sometimes people are unable to correctly evaluate the testimony of experts for a variety of reasons related to the way they identify themselves as members of different groups. And if they identify themselves with as members of a group that sets itself off from those experts, this can be the beginning of a problem. And this is where the issue of believing to belong and echo chambers comes in. So I'm going to start by talking about the reading we had from Helene de Cruz, Believing to Belong. De Cruz begins by introducing the novice expert problem, which they defined this way. Non-experts need to be able to evaluate the reliability of experts, but they don't have the skills to do so. De Cruz, by the way, uses they-them pronouns. This is a problem we all face because we are all novices in most things. De Cruz also points out that normally people avoid the novice expert problem by using indirect measures of reliability, like reputation and internal consistency. This corresponds roughly to our critical questions for arguments from authority. Internal consistency specifically relates to the third critical question for arguments from authority: does this fit with everything else we know? We can also use our partial knowledge of a field to evaluate reliability here. Like if someone says that a predicted eclipse is a sign that people on Earth have been sinful, you can say, I don't think eclipses work that way. Because even though you don't know much about astronomy, you do know that eclipses are caused by the moon passing in front of the sun. Most of the time, this kind of reasoning, the kind of reasoning we outlined in our critical questions for arguments from authority, is adequate. However, in certain circumstances, we run into a problem that de Cruz labels denialism. Cruz defines denialism this way: the refusal to believe in facts and theories for which there is a high degree of scientific consensus. The examples they use are vaccine denialism, climate change denialism, and evolution denialism. It's worth noting that the origin of the term denialism is not actually from any of these sciences, but from the study of history. The original denialism was Holocaust denialism, the refusal to believe that the Nazis murdered 6 million Jews, along with Roma, gay people, and other people they despised. But actually, the pattern here mirrored the pattern with denialism about these more contemporary scientific issues, because what the Holocaust denialists did is reject concrete empirical evidence of an actual event, and they did this out of motivations very similar to the denialists about scientific issues, as we will now see. So, de Cruz wants to emphasize that in a lot of these situations, there is more at stake than just the evidence. People have what they call non-epistemic reasons for belief. So these are just motivations for accepting a belief that are unrelated to the truth of the belief or the evidence for that belief. And you may think that You may think that this is automatically irrational, but it is something that we all take part in because there are lots of groups that we are a part of where there is actually belief requirements for being a member of the group. And that's going to be a strong motivation, really, for anyone, right? Non epistemic reasons for belief are ubiquitous and influential on us all. But they do, in fact, don't point us towards true beliefs. They point us just as much towards false beliefs, because by definition, they are non epistemic. They aren't related to the evidence. Another important thing to think about is the social signaling function of belief. When you're in a group that has belief requirements for membership, um, the demonstrations of that belief become a way of signaling group membership, right? And so people will get really loud about the beliefs that make them a member of the group to show how much they belong to the group. And again, this is not something that is limited to, for instance, religious contexts. People go along with the group all the time. And so the Cruz talks about the Ash conformity experiments. And I'm just going to summarize them here. Basically, uh, a group of people were asked to judge um, which two lines were the same length, right? So you're just given what seems like an obvious question here. The line on the left is the same length as line C on the right. And so you're in a group of people, and you think everyone in your group is a part of this experiment where you're asked to judge the lengths of lines. But as it turns out, all but one of the people in your group are actors. You're the only one who's in the group who's not an actor. And so on one round, all the other people in the group give the wrong answer to the question. They say that the line on the left is the same length as line B, for instance. This must be a curious situation to find yourself in. But about a quarter of the time, people will just agree with everyone around them and not with their own eyes that are clearly telling them that the line on the left is the same length as line C, right? Um, and often they will just be open about the fact that they were just doing this to go along. So do subjects, yeah, the subjects who yield believe the wrong answer? No, they gave the wrong answer to get along with everyone else. Um, so this is another one of these psychological experiments that were popular starting in the 50s and continued on to the 70s that were based on deception in one way or another. And we've drawn on these a fair amount, actually, in this course. Some of Festinger's work relied on deception, for instance. But they just got more and more out of hand. And so this is a parody article from The Onion that suggests that the majority of psychological experiments conducted in the 70s were just crimes. And the picture here is an allusion to the Stanford prison experiment, which um, uh, called on actors to play the role of guards and prisoners, and people just got too into the role and got abusive. Although some people now say that no one was actually getting too into the role and getting abusive, they were just play acting for the experimenters. The point is, by the 1970s, all these experiments based on deception had just gotten out of hand. And I laughed at the last line of the Onion article. The report went on to mention that the remaining 21% of experiments, while not rising to the level of crimes, were still flat out racist. That's a parody. but it's kind of close to the truth. De Cruz also discusses Henrik and Boyd on conformist transmission of belief. So already we've started to see that people believe things for non-epistemic reasons. For instance, to show that they're a member of a group. And actually, there's a reason people do this. Henrik and Boyd suggest that holding the same beliefs as the rest of your group is evolutionarily adaptive, even when the belief is false. So think about our brains. Our brains are evolved organs. And 150,000 years ago, when the cognitive architecture of our brains was emerging, we learned to work together to survive in all sorts of different kinds of environments. And being able to all do the same thing allowed us to survive. And group belief helps coordinate action. So if we all believe the same thing, we can act together. And that is still useful even if what we believe isn't exactly correct, right? Another thing that happens is, cooperation requires a lot of solidarity. You need to really trust the people around you. And unusual beliefs can actually reinforce group identity more than other things. So you think about beliefs such as Jehovah's Witnesses not refusing blood transfusions. Among other things, holding this belief shows that you're really serious about belonging to the group, right? Um, And so this is true for a lot of groups that have really um, um, unusual beliefs. Flat earthers. If you're a part of a flat earth online community where everyone believes in the flat earth idea, um, you can now signal how serious you are, how much you love this group by walking around and telling everyone that you're a flat earther and facing the consequences of that, because most people will um look down on you for that. And the advantage is that you can really, really show that you are true to your group. And this also, I think, shows that uh, confirmation bias is, an evolutionary adaptation. It allows us to stay with our current beliefs and rely on each other to continue to stay with, uh, uh, rely on other people to continue to stay with their beliefs. And so we can plan out and coordinate action over time. If we are always seeing evidence that reinforces our beliefs. Confirmation bias steers us, keeps us on beliefs that might be false, but they help coordinate action. So all this leads to De Cruz's theory of denialism. People have non-epistemic reasons for belief, that is, reasons for believing that aren't actually evidence for that belief. Group membership is an example. People belong to groups that have belief requirements for membership. Religion is a common example here. To be a member of a religion, you generally have to have certain beliefs about God. But having unusual beliefs is an especially good way of reinforcing group membership. If your group believes something odd, then proudly stating that belief can signal that you are a loyal member of that group. Science denialism fits this pattern well. So this kind of believing to belong becomes another factor in what we will, at the end of this video, be presenting under the name in-group epistemic distortion. This is a general term for what happens when a tight-knit group holds a belief radically at odds with the evidence. So now I want to transition to the next section of this course, which is about in-group epistemic distortion and the tactics of bad faith actors. So far in this class, we've been talking about factors that interfere with our ability to recognize experts and reason well with arguments from authority. We talked about how feelings of group membership can get you to cling to unjustified beliefs, and how cult leaders and similar people can poison you against believing legitimate experts. I want to pay attention now to the people who are leading you away from legitimate experts, the tactics they use, and the situations they set up. I'm labeling these situations in-group epistemic distortion. In discussing this, we are now thoroughly in the realm of social epistemology. Remember at the outset, I said that there were three main ways to study critical thinking. The traditional philosophical way, which focuses on arguments, the psychological way, which focuses on cognitive biases, and the methods of social epistemology. Social epistemology is the study of the way we work together in groups as critical thinkers to create knowledge, or alternately fail to work together and wind up creating ignorance. So let's now turn to the idea of in-group epistemic distortion. You can think of in-group epistemic distortion roughly as being groupthink. But people use the term groupthink in all sorts of ways. And I want to have a term that is inclusive of the variety of phenomena that I think come together when you have a group of people that are not functioning together as critical thinkers. So I define in-group epistemic distortion as a collection of misleading arguments, cognitive biases, and abusive social strategies that cause groups of people to adopt and stick to radically unjustified beliefs. So here's a graphic that illustrates in a somewhat emotional manner all the things that come together to create in-group epistemic distortion, or many of the things that come together. Some of these things are things that we just discussed in this class. Things like believing to belong, evidential preemption, and echo chambers. All of those were just discussed in this class. Others are things we've discussed in earlier classes, like confirmation bias, which came up in class 4, testimonial injustice, which came up in class 20, and identity protective cognition that came up in class 16. In the next section, I want to bring in more factors that have this effect and also talk about the tactics that individuals can use if they are not acting as critical thinkers but acting selfishly to exploit these phenomena. And all of this creates what I'm going to call in-group epistemic distortion, which leads you to a group of people who all hold beliefs that are radically unjustified by the evidence. Now, you might be thinking in this case, how do I know I'm not in one of these bubbles? I mean, it's easy enough to look at someone else's group and say, "Oh gosh, you are all clearly in a cult and believe something weird." But how do I know I'm not the one who is wrong? Well, that actually forces us to go back to the original tactics of the philosophical approach to critical thinking and good arguments, including deductive arguments, inductive arguments, arguments by analogy, arguments using generalizations, arguments from testimony, that sort of thing. In any case, all of that is for the next section, where we will be focusing on in-group epistemic distortion and the tactics of bad faith actors.